The morning I found the fluorescent orange envelope tucked into my front door. I had been living in Riverside Meadows subdivision in Chandler, Arizona, for exactly 3 years, and I thought I had finally figured out how to stay under the HOA's radar. I ripped open the envelope while standing on my front porch, my coffee mug still warm in my other hand. The letter inside was printed on official letterhead with the words "Violation Notice" stamped across the top in angry red ink. My eyes scanned down to the meat of it: a $500 fine for unauthorized seasonal decorations exceeding community standards and posing potential safety hazards. I read it twice before looking up at my house. My Christmas decorations were modest by any standard. A single strand of white lights outlined my roofline. A small inflatable snowman sat cheerfully next to my mailbox. A wreath hung on my front door. That was it. No elaborate light show, no animatronic Santa, nothing that would make Clark Griswold proud. I had specifically kept things simple because I knew Patricia Winters, our HOA president, had a reputation for being difficult. I pulled out my phone and called my buddy Marcus, who lived 2 streets over. He answered on the 3rd ring. "You get one too?" I asked. "Get what?" "A violation notice for Christmas decorations." "Nope, mine are still up from last week. What did yours say?" I read him the letter verbatim. He whistled low. $500. Zachary, that's insane. The Hendersons have a full nativity scene with spotlights. The corner house has synchronized music lights. You've got like 3 things. Exactly what I was thinking, I said. Zachary Orson, that was me, 34 years old, working as a software engineer from home, and apparently now a criminal mastermind for putting up a wreath. "You going to the board meeting next week?" Marcus asked. I didn't know there was one. "3rd Tuesday of every month. You should go. Contest it." I thanked him and hung up, staring at the letter again. Something felt wrong about this. I had read the HOA bylaws when I bought the house, and while they were extensive and often petty, I remembered the decoration section being pretty standard. No permanent alterations without approval, nothing obscene, keep it tasteful. My decorations checked all those boxes. I went inside and spent the next hour digging through my filing cabinet until I found my copy of the HOA covenant, conditions and restrictions, the CCRs as they were commonly called. I flipped to the section on seasonal decorations. It stated that holiday decorations were permitted from November 15th through January 15th, must be in keeping with the aesthetic values of the community, and could not pose legitimate safety hazards. Nothing about quantity limits or specific restrictions on the types of decorations allowed. Then I did something that would change everything. I pulled up the Chandler Municipal Building Code online. I had a hunch, and after about 30 minutes of searching through zoning regulations and residential codes, I found it. Section 42.7.3 of the Chandler Building Code explicitly protected homeowners' rights to display reasonable holiday decorations without restriction by private entities, including homeowner associations, as long as those decorations met basic electrical safety standards and did not violate any fire codes. I sat back in my chair, feeling a smile spread across my face. The city building code superseded HOA rules. Patricia Winters had just made a very expensive mistake. I called the non-emergency number for the Chandler Building and Safety Department. A friendly woman named Rosa answered and listened to my situation. She asked me to describe my decorations in detail, then asked if I had photos. "I can take some right now," I said. "Do that and email them to me." "Based on what you're telling me, your decorations sound completely compliant with city code. The building code does protect your right to display them. If your HOA is threatening fines, They may be operating outside their legal authority. She gave me her email address, and I sent the photos within 10 minutes. She called me back 20 minutes later. "Mr. Orson, your decorations are absolutely fine. In fact, they're more modest than most I see. I'm going to send you a formal letter you can present to your HOA citing the relevant building codes. I would also recommend you attend their next board meeting with this documentation." "That's next Tuesday," I said. "Perfect timing. And Mr. Orson, we take these matters seriously. If an HOA is violating city code by restricting legal decorations, that's something we need to address." I thanked her profusely and felt a weight lift off my shoulders. This was going to be good. The following Tuesday evening, I walked into the community center with a manila folder tucked under my arm. The folder contained printouts of the city building code, the letter from Rosa at Building and Safety, photographs of my decorations with timestamps, and my copy of the HOA CCRs with relevant sections highlighted. I had dressed in business casual, wanting to look professional but not like I was trying too hard. The community center meeting room was one of those generic spaces with folding chairs arranged in rows facing a long table where the board sat. About 20 other homeowners were scattered around the room, most looking bored or irritated to be there. I recognized a few faces from neighborhood barbecues and the occasional wave while getting mail. Patricia Winters sat in the center of the board table like a queen on her throne. She was exactly what you would picture when someone says, "HOA Karen." Mid-50s, blonde hair cut in a severe bob, wearing a cream-colored blazer with shoulder pads that looked like they time-traveled from 1987. She had that pinched expression of someone perpetually smelling something unpleasant. Flanking her were 4 other board members, none of whom I knew personally. Patricia called the meeting to order with a sharp rap of her gavel. We trudged through routine business, approval of last month's minutes, a discussion about pool maintenance contracts, a debate about whether the landscaping company was properly trimming the median bushes. I waited patiently, my folder resting on my lap. Finally, Patricia said, "We'll now move to open forum. Any homeowner may address the board for up to 3 minutes on any topic." I stood up. Patricia's eyes locked onto me, and I saw recognition flicker across her face. "State your name and address for the record," she said coolly. "Zachary Orson, 4217 Mesquite Drive. Proceed." I walked to the front of the room, very aware of everyone's eyes on me. I opened my folder and pulled out the violation notice. Last week, I received this notice of violation claiming my Christmas decorations exceed community standards and pose safety hazards. The fine is $500. I held up the letter so everyone could see it. A few murmurs rippled through the audience. Patricia's expression didn't change. "Your decorations are excessive and not in keeping with our community's values." "I have photographs of my decorations," I said, pulling them out and holding them up. 1 strand of white lights, 1 small inflatable snowman, 1 wreath. Can you explain what's excessive about that?" One of the other board members, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, leaned forward. "The CCRs give the board discretion to determine what meets community aesthetic standards." "They do," I agreed. "But the CCRs also have to comply with municipal law." I pulled out the building code printout. Section 42.7.3 of the Chandler Building Code explicitly protects homeowners' rights to display reasonable holiday decorations without restriction by HOAs, as long as those decorations meet electrical and fire safety standards. The room got very quiet. Patricia's face was turning an interesting shade of pink. "I don't know what you think you're doing," she started, but I cut her off politely. I also have this letter from Rosa Martinez at the Chandler Building and Safety Department. I held it up. She has reviewed photos of my decorations and confirmed they are fully compliant with all city codes. She also confirmed that the city building code supersedes HOA restrictions in this matter. This is absurd, Patricia snapped. The HOA has authority over aesthetic matters in this community. Not when those aesthetic rules conflict with city code, I said. I was keeping my voice level and professional, but inside I was enjoying this immensely. I'm requesting that the board rescind this violation and acknowledge that my decorations are legal under municipal law. The thin man with glasses, whose name placard read Gerald Fisher, was reading something on his laptop. He looked uncomfortable. Patricia, can we take a brief recess to review this? No, Patricia said flatly. The board's decision stands. With respect, Mrs. Winters, Gerald said, I'm looking at the city code right now. It does appear to say what Mr. Orson claims. I don't care what it says, Patricia hissed. This is our community and we set the standards. A woman in the third row raised her hand. I'd like to hear more about this building code protection. Does that mean the HOA can't restrict any decorations? Reasonable decorations, I clarified. The code protects reasonable displays that meet safety standards. This is getting off track, Patricia said, rapping her gavel. Mr. Orson, your time is up. The violation stands. Next speaker. Actually, I said, I have 2 minutes left according to your rules, and I want it noted for the record that I am formally contesting this violation based on Municipal Building Code Section 42.7.3. I am also requesting that the board provide legal justification for how this fine complies with city law. Patricia's eyes narrowed to slits. Noted. Next speaker. I returned to my seat, adrenaline pumping through my veins. The rest of the meeting was a blur. Another homeowner asked about the decorations issue, but Patricia shut it down. After the meeting adjourned, several people came up to me asking for copies of the building code section. I had anticipated this and brought extras. Marcus caught up with me in the parking lot. Dude, that was epic. Did you see her face? Pretty sure she's going to double down, I said. You ready for that? I hope so. I was right about Patricia doubling down. 3 days later, I received another letter. This one informed me that if I did not remove my decorations within 48 hours, the fine would increase to $1,000, and the HOA would place a lien on my property. A lien. Over a wreath and some lights. I called Rosa at Building and Safety immediately. She sounded angry when I explained the escalation. Mr. Orson, this is now a code enforcement matter. The HOA is actively violating municipal code. I need you to forward me all correspondence from them. I'm going to have our legal department send them a formal cease and desist. Can they do that? The city has authority to enforce building codes. When an HOA violates those codes, we absolutely can intervene. Give me 24 hours. I spent those 24 hours doing research. I found out that Patricia Winters had been HOA president for 8 years. I found out that during her tenure, the HOA had issued hundreds of violations for increasingly petty reasons. I found a local Facebook group called Riverside Meadows HOA Victims, with over 100 members sharing horror stories. One couple had been fined for having the wrong shade of beige on their garage door. Another homeowner was threatened with legal action for parking their Honda Civic in their own driveway because it was not a luxury vehicle befitting the community. This wasn't just about my Christmas decorations. Patricia Winters was running the HOA like her personal fiefdom, and she had been getting away with it because most people didn't have the time, money, or knowledge to fight back. I joined the Facebook group and posted about my situation. including the building code information. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Dozens of people shared similar stories. Many asked for copies of the building code sections. Several people said they had paid fines rather than fight because they didn't know they had legal grounds to contest. A woman named Linda Brennan sent me a private message. She lived 3 blocks away and had been fighting the HOA for 2 years over various violations. She was the one who had started the Facebook group. "Zachary, I've been documenting HOA abuses for years," her message said. "Would you be willing to meet? I think we might be able to help each other." We met at a coffee shop in downtown Chandler the next morning. Linda was in her early 40s, with tired eyes and the determined set to her jaw that comes from prolonged fighting. She brought 3 ring binders full of documentation. "Patricia Winters has cost me over $8,000 in bogus fines," Linda said, spreading papers across the table. "Grass too long. House number not properly visible. Holiday decorations up past deadline even though I took them down on time. Every time I contest something, she adds more violations." "Why haven't you taken legal action?" I asked. "I tried. I hired a lawyer. Cost me $3,000 just for him to send letters. The HOA has a legal fund and they just buried me in motions and delays until I couldn't afford to continue." She looked at my folder. "But you have something I didn't have. You have the city on your side. Building and Safety is sending a cease and desist," I confirmed. Linda's eyes lit up. "That changes everything. If the city is involved, this becomes a code enforcement issue, not just a contract dispute between you and the HOA. Do you know what that means?" "Not exactly." "It means the power dynamic shifts. The HOA can bully individual homeowners, but they can't bully the city. If they continue violating building code, the city can fine them, can impose penalties, can even pursue criminal charges if it's egregious enough." Criminal charges. That seemed extreme. Think about it. If Patricia is knowingly violating municipal code, if she's placing liens on properties illegally, if she's collecting fines that she has no legal authority to collect, that's fraud. That's potentially extortion. And if any of that HOA money is being misused. She trailed off meaningfully. "You think she's stealing from the HOA? I don't know. But someone should probably look at the books. When was the last time there was a proper audit?" I didn't know, but I made a note to find out. True to her word, Rosa called me that afternoon. "Mr. Orson, the city's legal department has sent a formal cease and desist letter to your HOA. They have been informed that your decorations comply with municipal code and that any attempt to fine you or place a lien on your property for those decorations is a violation of Chandler Building Code. We've also opened an investigation into whether the HOA has been systematically violating code with other homeowners. What happens if they ignore the letter? Then we escalate. Fines, court orders. We take this seriously." I thanked her and called Linda immediately. She whooped so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. "We need to get the word out," she said. "Every homeowner who's been illegally fined needs to know they can contest based on this." Over the next few days, Linda and I worked together to spread information. We posted in the Facebook group. We printed flyers with the relevant building code sections and distributed them around the neighborhood. We compiled a list of everyone who had been fined for decoration violations in the past 3 years. It was 17 families. Patricia Winters responded exactly as I expected. She called an emergency HOA board meeting. The community center was packed when I arrived. Easily 60 homeowners showed up, triple the usual attendance. The energy in the room was electric and hostile. I saw Linda sitting in the front row, her binders stacked next to her. Patricia rapped her gavel repeatedly, trying to call everyone to order. Her face was flushed, and she kept shooting daggers with her eyes at me and Linda. This emergency meeting has been called to address false information being spread throughout the community, Patricia began. There have been malicious rumors about the HOA's authority and legal standing. I want to make it absolutely clear that the board has full authority under our CCRs to enforce community standards. What about the city building code? Someone shouted from the back. Patricia's jaw tightened. The city code does not supersede our community standards. That's not what the city says, I called out. I stood up, holding a copy of the cease and desist letter. I received a letter from the Chandler Legal Department. They explicitly state that the city building code supersedes HOA restrictions on decorations. Should I read it aloud? This is not open forum, Patricia snapped. Actually, Gerald Fisher said quietly, given the number of homeowners present and the serious nature of these questions, perhaps we should allow discussion. I agree, said another board member, a middle-aged woman named Sandra Cole. We've received dozens of calls and emails about this. People deserve answers. Patricia looked like she wanted to argue, but she was outnumbered. Fine. 10 minutes for questions. Hands shot up across the room. Patricia pointed at random, and for the next 30 minutes, not 10, angry homeowners grilled the board. It came out that 12 other families had received violation notices for Christmas decorations. 8 of them had already paid fines totaling over $3,000 combined. When Linda asked about those fines being refunded, Patricia refused to answer. The fines were legally assessed, she insisted. Based on what authority? Linda pressed. If the city says you can't restrict legal decorations, then those fines were collected illegally. That's fraud. The room erupted. People were standing, yelling questions, demanding answers. Patricia kept banging her gavel but had lost all control. Finally, Gerald Fisher stood up. I move that we table all decoration-related violations pending a legal review by our HOA attorney, he said loudly. Second, Sandra Cole said immediately. You can't do that, Patricia said. I just did. We need a vote. All in favor. 3 hands went up: Gerald, Sandra, and another board member I didn't know. Patricia and 1 other board member voted against. The motion carried. Patricia looked like she had been slapped. This meeting is adjourned, she said icily. People crowded around me and Linda after the meeting. Everyone wanted copies of the building code information. Several people asked about getting their fines refunded. One man, an attorney named Richard who lived in the neighborhood, offered to help organize a class action if it came to that. Patricia Winters has been running this HOA like a dictator for too long, Richard said. This might be the opening we need to force real change. I went home that night feeling exhausted but hopeful. My simple Christmas decorations had accidentally sparked a revolution. The next few weeks were chaotic. The HOA attorney, a lawyer named Douglas Pierce, sent a letter to all homeowners who had received decoration violations. The letter stated that, in an abundance of caution, all decoration-related fines were being suspended pending review. Not refunded, suspended. It was lawyer speak for admitting they screwed up without actually admitting it. Linda and I weren't satisfied with suspended. We wanted those fines refunded, and we wanted policy changes to prevent this from happening again. Linda reached out to everyone who had paid fines and organized a group. 12 families agreed to jointly demand refunds. I drafted a formal demand letter citing the building code and the city's cease and desist. Richard, the attorney from the neighborhood, reviewed it and added some legal polish. We sent it certified mail to the HOA board and their attorney. The response came from Douglas Pierce. He offered to refund 50% of the fines as a goodwill gesture. Goodwill gesture my ass, Linda said when we met to discuss it. They illegally collected those fines. We want 100% back plus interest. We should also demand a policy change, I added. Something in writing that acknowledges the building code and prevents this from happening again. Richard nodded. I agree. But here's the thing, if we push too hard, they'll dig in and force us to sue. That takes time and money. If we're strategic, we might be able to get most of what we want without litigation. We debated for over an hour and finally agreed on a counteroffer. Full refund of all decoration-related fines paid in the past 2 years. A formal policy amendment acknowledging that HOA decoration rules must comply with municipal building code, and Patricia Winter's resignation as president. The last one was Linda's addition. She's the problem. As long as she's in charge, this will keep happening with something else. Richard drew up the counteroffer and we sent it off. The response was swift and furious. Douglas Pierce called it extortionate and unreasonable. He said the board would never accept Patricia's forced resignation. Then we sue, Linda said flatly. All of us. Class action for fraud, illegal fines, and violation of municipal code. Richard started preparing the paperwork, but before we could file, something unexpected happened. I got a call from a woman named Sharon Mitchell. She was a board member I had barely noticed during the meetings, quiet and older, probably in her 60s. Mr. Orson, could we meet privately? I have information I think you need to see. We met at the same coffee shop where I had met Linda. Sharon looked nervous, constantly glancing around like she expected Patricia to materialize out of thin air. I've been on the board for 3 years, Sharon said. I originally joined because I wanted to help the community, but Patricia runs everything. She makes decisions without consulting us. She approves fines without board votes. She's supposed to report finances quarterly, but the reports she gives us are vague. Do you have copies? I asked. Some, but that's not the main issue. Sharon pulled out a folder. 6 months ago, I started getting suspicious about money. Our HOA fees are $200 a month per household. We have 300 homes. That's $60,000 a month, over $700,000 a year. But our expenses, landscaping, pool maintenance, insurance, legal fees, should only be about $400,000 annually. Even accounting for reserves and special projects, we should have significant surplus. But you don't. According to Patricia, we're barely breaking even. She keeps saying we need to raise fees. But the numbers don't add up. I'm a retired accountant. I know how to read financial statements. So last month, I filed a formal request to review the detailed books. As a board member, I have that right. What did you find? Patricia refused to provide them. She said the information was confidential. I pointed out that board members have legal access to financial records. She said I was being disruptive and threatened to have me removed from the board. Can she do that? Not unilaterally, but she controls enough votes to make my life hell. Sharon slid the folder across the table. I've been quietly collecting what I can. Copies of expense reports, bank statements I managed to get from our HOA meeting minutes, records of major expenditures. Look at this. I opened the folder. Inside were financial documents spanning the past 2 years. Sharon had highlighted several entries. Legal fees seemed excessive, over $80,000 in the past year alone. There were regular payments to a company called Meadows Management Consulting for amounts ranging from $2,000 to $5,000 monthly. What's Meadows Management Consulting? I asked. That's what I wanted to know. I looked them up. The company was registered 18 months ago. Want to guess who owns it? I had a sinking feeling. Patricia, her daughter, Melissa Winters. But here's the thing, I've been to every board meeting for 3 years. We've never voted to hire a management consulting company. These payments were never approved by the board. That was fraud, clear, unambiguous fraud. Sharon, this is serious. We need to bring this to the police. I know, but I need protection. If I go public with this, Patricia will come after me. She'll find some violation, some excuse to fine me and make my life miserable. We have 50 people now who are fighting the HOA. You won't be alone. Sharon looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. Okay, let's do this right. I called Linda and Richard immediately. We met that evening at Richard's home office. Sharon laid out everything she had found. Richard's expression grew grimmer with each document. This is embezzlement, he said finally. Potentially to the tune of over $100,000 based on these payments alone. We need to report this to the police, and we need to call for an emergency audit. The board has to approve an audit, Sharon said. Patricia will block it. Not if enough homeowners demand it, Linda said. The CCRs allow for homeowners to petition for special meetings. We need signatures from 20% of households. That's 60 signatures, I calculated. We can get that. We worked fast. Over the next 3 days, Linda and I went door to door collecting signatures. We explained the situation carefully. Patricia had potentially been embezzling HOA funds. We had evidence. We needed an emergency meeting and an independent audit. People were angry. Many had suspected financial mismanagement but had no proof. Some had tried to question expenses before and been shut down by Patricia. We got 60 signatures in 2 days. We got 100 by the end of the 3rd day. Richard filed the petition for an emergency meeting. Under the CCRs, the board had to schedule it within 10 days. They scheduled it for exactly 10 days later, probably hoping to stall and prepare. In the meantime, I went to the Chandler Police Department. I asked to speak with someone about potential fraud and was directed to Detective Sarah Chen in the Financial Crimes Unit. I brought Sharon's documentation and laid out everything we had found. Detective Chen reviewed the documents carefully. This appears to show unauthorized payments from HOA funds to a company owned by the HOA president's family member. That's a potential conflict of interest at minimum, possibly embezzlement depending on whether any services were actually provided. We'll need to investigate. The HOA is having an emergency meeting in 8 days. There's going to be a call for an independent audit. Good. Don't mention police involvement yet. Let us do some preliminary investigation. If this is what it looks like, we'll want to build a solid case before making any moves. I left the police station feeling like things were finally moving in the right direction. But I should have known Patricia wouldn't go down without a fight. 4 days before the emergency meeting, I found my car keyed. Long, deep scratches ran down both sides. I filed a police report, but I had no proof of who did it. 2 days before the meeting, Linda called me in tears. Someone had filed a false complaint, with the city claiming her home business was operating without proper permits. She ran a small online jewelry business from her home office, fully licensed and legal. But now she had to deal with city inspectors and prove everything was legitimate. It's Patricia, Linda said. She's retaliating. The night before the emergency meeting, I got an anonymous email. No return address, no name. Just a message that read, "Drop this or you'll regret it. People who make trouble in this community don't stay long." I forwarded it to Detective Chen. She called me within an hour. "Mr. Orson, we take threats seriously. I'm going to have a patrol car drive by your house tonight, and I want you to save any other communications you receive. We're finding some interesting things in our investigation, and threatening witnesses would add to the potential charges. What have you found? I can't share details of an active investigation, but let's just say your instincts about the finances were correct." The emergency meeting was scheduled for 7 p.m. on a Wednesday. I arrived at 6:30 and the parking lot was already full. Cars lined the streets. Inside, every chair was taken and people stood along the walls. Easily 200 homeowners had shown up. Patricia sat at the board table looking pale but defiant. The other board members looked uncomfortable except for Gerald and Sandra, who looked determined. Richard stood up to speak first since he had filed the petition. He laid out the case calmly and professionally. Unexplained payments to a company owned by Patricia's daughter. Lack of board approval for major expenses. Vague financial reporting. The solution was simple: an immediate independent audit by a qualified forensic accountant. "These are baseless accusations," Patricia said, but her voice lacked its usual authority. "Our finances are properly managed." "Then an audit will prove that," Richard said. "If everything is legitimate, you have nothing to worry about." "I agree," Gerald said. "I move that we hire an independent forensic accountant to conduct a complete audit of HOA finances for the past 3 years. "Second," Sandra said immediately. "Discussion?" Gerald asked. One of the board members who usually sided with Patricia cleared his throat. "I think given the serious nature of these allegations, an audit is appropriate. We need to clear this up." Patricia was trapped. She called for a vote. 4 board members voted in favor. Only Patricia voted against. The motion carried. "I also move that Patricia Winters be temporarily suspended as president pending the results of the audit," Gerald said. That caused an uproar. Patricia shot to her feet. "You can't do that. I've been president for 8 years." "Which is exactly why we need fresh leadership during this investigation," Gerald said calmly. "We need someone without a conflict of interest overseeing the process." The vote was 3 in favor, 2 against. Gerald was appointed interim president. Patricia gathered her things and stormed out of the meeting. The community center erupted in conversation. People were excited, angry, relieved. Linda was crying happy tears. Sharon looked like a weight had been lifted off her shoulders. I caught up with Gerald after the meeting. "Thank you for doing the right thing." "I should have done it years ago," he said quietly. "I knew something was wrong, but I told myself it wasn't my problem. When you stood up at that meeting about the decorations, it reminded me that staying silent makes you complicit. I'm sorry it took this long." Over the next month, the forensic accountant did their work. Detective Chen's investigation continued in parallel. I kept my Christmas decorations up through January 15th, the full period allowed by the CCRs, and it felt like a small victory every time I saw them. The audit results came back in early February. The accountant had found over $130,000 in unauthorized payments to Meadows Management Consulting. There was no evidence any actual consulting services had been provided. Additionally, there were kickbacks from the landscaping company, excessive legal fees for unnecessary actions, and evidence that Patricia had been using HOA funds to pay for personal expenses, including dinners, spa treatments, and a vacation to Hawaii that was supposedly a conference. The forensic accountant's report was turned over to the police and the HOA board. Gerald called another emergency meeting to present the findings to the community. Patricia didn't show up to that meeting. Smart move on her part because the homeowners were out for blood. The room was filled with angry voices demanding justice, demanding their money back, demanding criminal charges. The board has voted unanimously to pursue legal action against Patricia Winters for embezzlement and fraud, Gerald announced. "We've also filed a formal complaint with the Maricopa County Attorney's Office. Additionally, we're looking into recovering the stolen funds through civil litigation." 2 days later, Detective Chen called me. "Patricia Winters was arrested this morning." She's being charged with 18 counts of fraud, 12 counts of embezzlement, and 3 counts of witness intimidation. We found evidence she was behind the threats you and others received. She's being held on $50,000 bail." I sat down hard. It was real. It was actually happening. "What about the money?" I asked. "Asset forfeiture will be part of the process. We've frozen her accounts. If she's convicted, restitution will be part of the sentencing. It won't be immediate, but the HOA should eventually recover most of the funds." The story hit the local news that evening. I watched the broadcast showing Patricia being led out of her house in handcuffs. The reporter explained how an HOA president had been stealing from her community for years, until one homeowner's fight over Christmas decorations had exposed the scheme. My phone rang constantly. News outlets wanted interviews. Neighbors wanted to thank me. Linda called crying again, this time from relief and vindication. "You did it," she said. "You actually did it. You brought her down." "We did it," I corrected. "All of us together." The legal process moved slowly but steadily. Patricia's attorney tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the county attorney's office wasn't interested in going easy. The case was too clear-cut, too well documented. In late April, Patricia pled guilty to multiple charges in exchange for the prosecution dropping some of the lesser counts. She was sentenced to 5 years in prison and ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA. Her daughter, Melissa, was also charged with conspiracy and fraud for her role with the fake consulting company. She pled guilty and got 3 years probation plus community service. Meanwhile, the HOA underwent massive changes. Gerald stepped down as interim president once things stabilized, saying he wanted to focus on his family. A special election was held. Linda Brennan was elected as the new president. Richard, the attorney, joined the board. So did Sharon Mitchell. 3 other homeowners who had been active in fighting Patricia also won seats. The new board's first action was to refund all illegally collected fines from the past 3 years, not just decoration fines, but every questionable violation. It totaled over $40,000 returned to homeowners. They also completely rewrote the enforcement procedures to include checks and balances, an appeals process, and regular financial transparency. The second action was to formally amend the CCRs to explicitly acknowledge that HOA rules must comply with all municipal, county, state, and federal laws, and that homeowners had the right to display reasonable holiday decorations, as protected by city code. My $500 fine was not only rescinded, but I received a formal letter of apology from the new board. It felt good, but honestly, by that point it wasn't about the fine anymore. It was about the principle, and about making sure Patricia could never do to anyone else what she had done to our community. In June, the HOA held a community celebration at the pool. It was ostensibly a summer kickoff party, but really it was a celebration of new leadership and a fresh start. I was grilling burgers when Marcus came up and clinked his beer bottle against mine. "To Christmas decorations," he said with a grin. "To knowing your rights," I countered. Linda gave a short speech thanking everyone who had stood up and fought back. She presented Sharon Mitchell with a plaque recognizing her courage in bringing forward the financial evidence. She also tried to give me a plaque, but I waved it off. "I just wanted to put up a wreath," I said, which got a big laugh from everyone, but Linda insisted. "Zachary, you did more than fight for a wreath. You showed all of us that we don't have to accept abuse from people in power. You proved that standing up matters. This community is better because you wouldn't back down." The plaque now hangs in my home office. It reads, "In recognition of Zachary Orson, whose defense of his right to holiday decorations led to justice and positive change for the entire Riverside Meadows community." Christmas rolled around again, and this time I went all out. Not crazy over the top, but definitely more than my original modest display. I added a second strand of lights. I got a bigger inflatable snowman. I hung garland and lights on my porch railings. I put out lawn decorations of reindeer and candy canes. On December 1st, when I finished setting everything up, neighbors started stopping by. Not to complain, but to compliment, to thank me, to show me their own decorations. Our street looked like a winter wonderland by the end of the first week of December. The best moment came when I was outside adjusting a strand of lights that had come loose. A car slowed down and a woman I didn't recognize rolled down her window. "Are you Zachary Orson?" she asked. "That's me. I live over in the Sunset Hills subdivision. We've been dealing with HOA problems similar to what you went through. I read about your case in the news. We just filed a petition to audit our HOA finances based on what you found. I wanted to say thank you. You gave us hope that we could fight back too." She drove away before I could respond, but I stood there for a long moment feeling a sense of satisfaction that went way beyond my personal victory. Change spreads. Justice is contagious. One person standing up gives others the courage to stand up too. Detective Chen called me one more time in late December. "I wanted to update you. Patricia Winters began her prison sentence last week. The restitution payments have started being processed. Your HOA should see the first recovery of funds in January." "That's great news." "It is. And Mr. Orson, I want you to know that this case has prompted our department to take a harder look at HOA complaints. We're seeing a pattern across the valley of HOA boards abusing their authority. Your case gave us a roadmap for how to investigate these situations. You've made a real difference." After we hung up, I walked outside to look at my Christmas lights. They twinkled cheerfully in the cool December evening. Behind me, my neighbor's lights glowed on every house down the street. Above, stars were starting to appear in the darkening sky. I thought about that first violation notice, that fluorescent orange envelope that had started all of this. At the time, it had seemed like a huge problem, an unfair attack, an abuse of power. And it was all of those things. But it also became an opportunity. An opportunity to stand up, to fight back, to demand accountability, and ultimately to make real change. My phone buzzed with a text from Linda. "Board meeting tomorrow night at 7. We're discussing the new community playground equipment. Want to come?" I smiled and texted back. "I'll be there." Because that's the thing about community. It requires participation. It requires people showing up, paying attention, and being willing to speak up when something's wrong. For too long, people in Riverside Meadows had stayed silent because fighting seemed too hard, too expensive, too risky. Patricia had counted on that silence. She had weaponized apathy. But apathy only works until someone decides enough is enough, until someone decides that principle matters more than convenience, until someone takes that first stand and shows everyone else that victory is possible. I was lucky. I had the building code on my side. I had supportive neighbors like Linda and professionals like Richard willing to help. I had a city department that took code violations seriously, and a police detective who cared about financial crimes. Not everyone has those advantages. But everyone has the right to stand up for themselves. Everyone has the power to say no to injustice, even when it comes from your HOA. The next morning, I was making coffee when I noticed an envelope in my mailbox. My heart did a little skip, conditioned by months of HOA drama, but when I opened it, I found a simple card. Inside was a handwritten note from one of my neighbors 3 houses down, an elderly couple I had only waved to occasionally. "Dear Zachary, thank you for your courage this year. We paid over $2,000 in fines to Patricia for violations we didn't understand and couldn't afford to fight. Thanks to you, we got that money back. We used it to visit our grandchildren for Christmas. You gave us that gift. Merry Christmas. George and Martha Henderson. I had to sit down. The money had seemed abstract, numbers on a spreadsheet, restitution payments, and audit findings. But George and Martha's note made it real. Real people had been hurt by Patricia's greed. Real families had struggled under unjust fines, and real change had given them relief. That's what I held on to as the months passed, and life in Riverside Meadows settled into a new normal. The decorations came down in January. The community continued healing and reorganizing. Linda proved to be an excellent HOA president, transparent, fair, and focused on actually serving the community rather than controlling it. In March, I got a call from a journalist working on a story about HOA reform legislation being proposed in the Arizona state legislature. Apparently, my case and several others like it had prompted lawmakers to consider new regulations requiring independent audits of HOAs over a certain size, better financial transparency, and stronger protections for homeowners fighting unjust violations. Would you be willing to testify at a legislative hearing? The journalist asked. I thought about it for about half a second. Absolutely. I testified in front of the Arizona House Committee on Government and Elections in April. I told my story, starting with that fluorescent orange violation notice and ending with Patricia's conviction and the community reforms that followed. I talked about how a simple Christmas decoration dispute had revealed systemic corruption. I talked about how building codes had protected my rights when the HOA had tried to violate them. I talked about the importance of accountability and transparency in any organization that has power over people's homes and lives. The committee members asked good questions. Some were skeptical about imposing new regulations on HOAs. Others were sympathetic and shared stories from their own constituents about HOA abuses. I didn't know if the legislation would pass, but I knew I had done my part to advocate for change. The bill did pass, eventually, though, in a modified form. It required annual independent financial reviews for HOAs with more than 100 units. It mandated clear appeals processes for violations. It imposed penalties on HOA board members who knowingly violated state or municipal laws. It wasn't everything advocates had hoped for, but it was progress. Summer came and went. Fall arrived with cooler temperatures and the Arizona version of autumn, which mostly means it stops being unbearably hot. I was settling into normalcy, focusing on my work, enjoying my home, participating in community events without drama. November rolled around again, and with it came the question of Christmas decorations. I put up my lights over Thanksgiving weekend. This year, several neighbors asked if I would help them with their displays. Word had spread that I knew the building codes and could advise on what was protected and what wasn't. I found myself becoming the unofficial neighborhood expert on decoration regulations. I didn't mind. It felt good to help people navigate the rules and stand up for their rights. And this year, with Linda running the HOA, there were no violation notices. Not a single one. People decorated how they wanted within reasonable bounds, and nobody got fined or threatened or harassed. On Christmas Eve, I stood on my front porch watching the lights twinkle across the neighborhood. Every house glowed with decorations of varying styles and intensity. Some people went minimalist like my original display. Others went elaborate with full animated displays. The diversity was beautiful, and more importantly, it was free. Free from the tyranny of one person's aesthetic preferences imposed through fear and fines. Marcus and his wife came over for dinner that night. Linda and her husband stopped by for dessert. Sharon Mitchell brought cookies. Richard and his family dropped in for drinks. It became an impromptu party, the house filling with laughter and conversation, and the kind of community spirit that can only exist when people aren't afraid of their neighbors or their HOA. Remember last Christmas when this all started? Marcus said, raising his glass. Who would have thought your wreath would bring down an empire? It wasn't the wreath, Linda said. It was Zachary refusing to accept injustice. It was all of us deciding we deserved better. To better leadership, Richard offered. To knowing your rights, I added. To Christmas decorations, Marcus said with a grin, circling back to his original toast from the summer. We all laughed and drank and celebrated. Outside, my modest lights glowed steadily, a simple decoration that had accidentally changed everything. 2 years have passed since that first violation notice. Patricia Winters is still in prison, scheduled for release in 3 more years. Her daughter Melissa completed probation and moved out of state. The HOA has recovered most of the embezzled funds and has built up proper reserves under Linda's careful financial management. I still live at 4217 Mesquite Drive. I still work from home as a software engineer. I still put up Christmas decorations every year, and every year I think about that moment when I decided to fight instead of just paying the fine and moving on. That decision changed my life and changed my community. It taught me that standing up matters, that knowing your rights matters, and that ordinary people have more power than they think when they're willing to use it. The plaque Linda gave me still hangs in my office. Sometimes when I'm working, I glance at it and remember. Remember the fear of that first fine. Remember the anger at the injustice. Remember the satisfaction of fighting back successfully. Remember the importance of community and courage and refusing to let bullies win. Every December, I get messages and emails from people across Arizona and even other states who have heard my story and are fighting their own HOA battles. I help when I can, sharing the building code information, offering advice on how to organize and document and persist. Some win their fights. Some don't. But all of them matter because all of them refuse to accept injustice silently. That's my legacy from the great Christmas decoration war of Riverside Meadows. Not the money recovered or the corrupt president imprisoned, though those things matter. The real legacy is showing people that they can stand up, that they should stand up. That sometimes fighting back is the right thing to do, even when it's hard, even when it's scary. Even when you're just one person against an organization that seems too powerful to challenge. Because here's the truth I learned. They're only powerful as long as we let them be. The moment we stand up, the moment we organize, the moment we demand accountability, that power evaporates like morning dew in the Arizona sun. So this Christmas, my decorations shine brightly. Not in defiance anymore, because there's nothing to defy. They shine in celebration of freedom, of justice, of community reclaimed from petty tyranny. They shine as a reminder that ordinary moments can become extraordinary when we have the courage to do what's right. And if anyone ever tries to find me for them again, well, I know exactly what building code to cite. And I have a lot more friends now who will stand with me. That's the real happy ending. Not victory over one corrupt HOA president, but the knowledge that we can win, that justice is possible, and that sometimes all it takes is one person refusing to back down over something as simple and beautiful as Christmas lights. The lights twinkle. The neighborhood glows. And in the warm Arizona evening, I stand on my porch and smile, knowing that this community is finally, truly home.